You are now experiencing the digital life with Kevin Lockett.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Digital Life. Recently I heard a group of teenagers debate who was better, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. Now this debate was quite interesting to me because I'm a huge Cleveland Cavs fan, but I was an immense Michael Jordan fan. So it's funny because you have kids arguing about who's better between Jordan and LeBron, and most of these kids were toddlers or weren't even born when Michael retired. At the end of the day, however, MJ edged out LBJ as the legend of Michael Jordan continues with another generation. On today's show, I talked to Roland Lazenby, author of Michael Jordan, The Life. During our interview, George and I discussed Jordan's ancestors, his Hall of Fame speech, his relationship with Phil Jackson, and more. If you're a fan of Michael Jordan or basketball in general, this show is a must listen. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Roland Lazenby, author of Michael Jordan, The Life. Okay, we're talking to Roland Lazenby, author of Michael Jordan, The Life. How are you today?
Kevin, I'm doing great.
You know, I like the fact that the original title that you wanted was Black Jesus, and the publishing company didn't like that.
Well, you know, I think there are a couple of reasons. Obviously, there's another Black Jesus, Earl Monroe, but right. Jordan sort of elevated that term, and I wanted to use it, but they wanted me to write a very, I don't want to say serious biography, but a very balanced one, and you know, publishing is a different business in this day and age. Little Brown is a great, great publisher, and I'm very lucky to be published by them. And so it's not that big a deal. What's important is that they allowed me to tell the story I wanted to tell.
So what made you decide to write a book about Jordan now? It's been about 11 years since he retired, and for a whole generation of kids, when they think of number 23, they think of LeBron James now. So what made you decide to write the book about Jordan at this time?
Well, you know, I had covered him for so long, and I'd written about him quite a bit before, and it's a great American story. It is a Black Power story, although a lot of people don't quite see it that way. It is a huge story, and it's not only big in terms of basketball, it's huge culturally. It's huge in a business sense. It's a gigantic business story. It is a very big family story. It's a very big American story. And for all those reasons, plus, you know, I just spent a lot of my life working on it, and there was much that hadn't been told I wanted to tell.
Yeah, you focus a lot on his family. Like, most people know about how much he loves his mom, and he's very close to his father. But I like the fact you focus on his grandfathers, which in a lot of ways were almost like the blueprint of the Michael Jordan that we see today.
Yes, and in a couple of different ways. One of the was actually the great-grandfather. My book begins in 1891. with the birth of Dawson Jordan, who was Michael's great-grandfather, and he lived, 4 generations of Jordan males lived together. He lived until Michael was 14, and a good part of that time, Michael lived with Dawson Jordan. And Dawson Jordan was quite a man. Now, he was 5'5" and crippled, but he ran the Jordan household, and he was a moonshiner. He moved logs down the river. He came through difficult times. He was a young man with a 15-month-old son back in the early part of the 20th century when his young wife died of tuberculosis, a very long, drawn-out disease. I wrote a biography of Jerry West, and when Jerry West's grandmother died back about the same time, his grandfather abandoned 6 kids, just threw them out to surrounding farms and took off. But Dawson Jordan didn't abandon his son. He and his son lived together for decades. And there's a very powerful family story there. On the other side, Miss Jordan, Michael's mom, her family was the Peoples. And her father a huge part of the book talks about sharecropping and the devastation for all kinds of Americans, but particularly African Americans. And sharecropping had left everyone broken. Then the Depression hit and really shattered millions of lives. And there's a story about that. You know, I wrote 1,000 pages for this book. It's 700. I had to cut out about 300 pages. And I got so caught up because I think it's such an important story, not just for basketball, but for our culture, to understand how rigged the game was for sharecroppers, and in particular for African Americans. And the other part of this that was so important to me is when we see those Carolina Tar Heel blue uniforms today, and we think of the liberalism that's known to be in and around Chapel Hill in a lot of ways, we really don't understand the history of what a deeply racist state North Carolina was, and in some ways still very much is. And that's a hard thing to talk about. But, North Carolina had more Klan members than all the other southern states combined. And so race, although Michael wasn't viewed, when I said it was a Black Power story, Michael wasn't a man of politics and protest, but African Americans in North Carolina had no political power. It was violently taken from them. And so just as his grandfather became this very successful guy as a sharecropper, he came to own his own land. African Americans in North Carolina had but one choice, and that was to really focus on economic power, and they had to do it in a rigged system. It's a big cultural story. Believe me, I talk plenty of basketball. I'm a basketball nut. I have been. I've written dozens of books on basketball. But we can't just play the games. We really have to work to understand all the cultural factors behind the games. And so that was part of my goal in writing this Jordan book. I'm not telling people things they don't know, but we're engaging in a discussion of things that need to be discussed.
Right. Jumping ahead, one of the things that I loved, a lot of people criticized Jordan for, was his Hall of Fame speech. And to me, that was like the most honest and open that I ever seen of Michael Jordan. But a lot of people, I guess they felt like he should be more humble, but I didn't want that. This is the reason he played this way on the court. This is why he won championships. Yeah.
He was alienated from Phil Jackson by then. George Mumford, the great African-American, I say African-American, he's a great sports psychologist and a dear friend of mine and one of the sources for this. And he explained to me that the reason people become alienated, whether they're alienated from their parents or their coaches or whatever figure in their lives, you have alienation because people realize they've been manipulated. And so as you read the book, you see some of this manipulation. And so Michael and Phil Jackson become alienated. And when Michael goes to fly to the Hall of Fame, he gathers around him to go a lot of the old guys who were with him in the early days. On his private jet, there's Tim Hallam, who's the longtime PR guy for the Bulls, and he and Jordan used to go at it all the time. And Joe O'Neill, the longtime ticket manager. And, these are guys that played golf in the office, putting in the trash cans with Jordan his rookie season. And they lived and obviously fought a lot of battles together. Jordan got assistant coach, his former assistant coach, Johnny Bach, the coach who urged him to attack, and to use his talent. And Phil fired Johnny Bach in some ways because he had this close relationship with Michael. And so Johnny was broke. He's in his almost 90 today, and Michael sent him money to come and get on his plane and to have a beautiful weekend. And there were all sorts of people like that who were not major figures, and nobody knows this, but Michael gathered these people to go with him. And as they got closer to Massachusetts, to Hall of Fame event in the plane, his old friends noticed Michael started getting nervous. And he was just trying to explain when he made that talk all the things that drove his competitiveness. And, of course, this book is obviously, when I write about great competitors, and I really want to study the psychology of Michael's competitiveness. And he was really speaking from the heart, trying to explain all the different things that fed his fire. It was ironic Phil Jackson had to sit in a sports bar to watch the Hall of Fame induction. But he noted that, too. He noted immediately Michael was trying to speak honestly. And, you know, part of it is the audience's fault and his fans' fault, I guess. But, you know, Nike marketed him so hard as this perfect preacher. And it was immensely successful. But it also set up all this unrealistic level of expectations from Michael in terms of everything he does. And so it is what it is, Kevin. It really is.
Why was Phil Jackson at a sports bar?
He just went there to see it. He was not at the Hall of Fame. He and Michael, I mean, they talked. They're just not, they once had a very close relationship. And the book explains, it's a long, drawn-out thing. It explains some of the issues.
I always wonder about Michael with Phil Jackson and Doug Collins. It seems like that he has a closer relationship, maybe now, with Doug Collins as he does with Phil Jackson. I mean, is that true or no?
No, I think just like he brought Doug in to coach in Washington, just like he had those guys in the plane going to the Hall of Fame, you know, Phil wanted Michael to come out and play with the Lakers. And Michael wanted to go his own way. And, you know, he appreciated Doug Collins as a coach for all the tremendous energy and enthusiasm he brought to coaching the Bulls. But Michael didn't protest. I think, you know, Doug Collins really lifted the franchise up. But there was a whole situation that sort of led Jerry Krause to move on to Phil Jackson and Tex Winter in the Triangle. And Doug wanted to go another way, and he didn't get along with Jerry Krause. And Jerry Krause, you know, if he had waited another year to fire Doug Collins, it might have been too late. Collins would have had all the power, and it would have been Collins firing Krause. And these power games behind NBA teams, I've been covering NBA teams a long time. They are subtle things that the public often doesn't see. But a lot of these guys, you know, they work together. They don't like each other all that much.
Right. I saw the 30 for 30 on ESPN about the Bad Boys.
I did their championship books. I love those guys.
Oh, wow.
Joe Dumars is great.
Wow, that's a whole different show right there. But the one thing I noticed about that team is that they were a family. And it seems like still, if one of those guys are in trouble or they need help, they would be there for each other. But it seems like where the Pistons seem like they're a family on and off the court, those Bulls teams weren't as close.
Well, you know, Isaiah was a very tough leader, and I did the Pistons championship books for 2 years, and the 2 years before they went to the championship. I did their books and traveled the team a lot. And I think the world of Joe Dumars, and the Pistons were, you know, Chuck Daly was a coach they all admired. But those guys, you know, were their own leaders. Isaiah was a driven guy. But Michael Jordan, he makes for the core of a great team. But as Phil Jackson explained to me in the early days of my working with him, Michael's tough to live with. And James Worthy, in the interviews for this book, you know, Worthy was a junior at North Carolina. Michael came in as a freshman, and as James Worthy explained to me a couple of years ago in the interview, he said, Michael was a bully, and he bullied me. And Michael, you know, battled so hard with his brother as a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. Then he had these titanic battles. And that's how Michael related to every teammate in his life. It was somebody to conquer in one-on-one. And, you know, these were, battles. And so Michael was a very demanding guy. That's why he's got those 6 rings. But that didn't mean it was a sweetheart's ball. It was pretty tough a lot of times.
So now we're at a point now where Michael's older now. He's remarried. He has twin girls. Do you think he's happier now, or do you think he's mellowed some from being that guy that he was, that was so driven and battled so much with his teammates? And I mean, do you think he's in a happier place now?
I think he was pretty miserable there with the Bobcats losing as they were. By the way, I have to say, Michael, if you go back and look, and I take you through, in this book, I take you through everything that happened in Washington. Mm-hmm. And Michael did, he put $40 to $50 million in profits in the pocket of Abe Pollan, the owner of the Washington Wizards. Pollan never fired anybody, and he fired Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan made more money for that franchise. He got rid of all the bad contracts on the books, and Michael is viewed as a dog. You know, Michael cast such a shadow as a player. Nobody did anything in the world as well as Michael Jordan played basketball. That's how it seemed. We all know that. You know, if I could be like Mike, the mark, he had this image in the worship. He was Black Jesus. But that meant that the second act he had, whether it was with the Wizards or the Bobcats. Now, the Bobcats, you're not far from there. You know, that was the Chernobyl of the NBA. You know what Shin, the owner down there, did in taking the Hornets out of town, and that was that went from a thriving NBA regional culture to a dead zone. And what Michael did is come in and, with some very astute moves, revive pro basketball in Charlotte. But it's sort of like when he played baseball. You know, they all hooted at him, and, you know, it was jarring to the crowds to see what a very average baseball player made. Later, when they looked back on it, they said, you know, what an amazing thing this guy did to go try to be with his father, his murdered father, and play baseball. And when you look back at Washington, and in a few years, people are going to look back at Charlotte, and it's deceptive in that way. People like to get very angry. All these fans have high expectations. They identify with Michael. You know, and he probably is the figure that ought to be there if we ever want to talk about post-racial. I don't think America is post-racial yet. It has improved in some ways, but there are a lot of things culturally that Michael's presence. It's not that Michael went out and did the hard work of protest and voter registration. He didn't get murdered in Mississippi. He didn't get bombed in Alabama. But as he told me as he neared 50, timing is everything. And he had this great luck that went with all his talent and all his work and all these things that happened. But in his own way, he was an important, and he remains an important cultural figure. He has lots of shortcomings, and I address them in the book. I'm not trying to set him up as Jesus. He's not Jesus. But, you know, if you stop and consider what he's done, he's the first player to become an owner. Just like his grandfather Peoples was the guy who owned his own land in the days of sharecropping. It's an important story, and I'm very happy I was able to discover a lot of the things and tell it in this book. And Kevin, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity you've given me to talk about it.
Well, thank you, because I had like tons of questions, but all these stories that you're telling me right now, I'm actually really, really looking forward to the book, because I have all the Jordan books for the most part. But it seems like there's a lot of things that even I didn't know, or even some things I didn't think about that's just compelling me to wait for this book to come out. So it's going to.
Well, I wrote that book about Jerry West for my hillbilly father, who loved basketball, and I wrote this book for the guys I grew up with that I've lost, who and I will tell you, these are dear, dear friends. And this is an important book for all Americans, but there's a lot of ignorance in this country about our history, and we don't want to talk about it. Right. And I think it's an important thing that we have conversations, because, I found I'll leave you with this. I found a report from 1922 in the University of North Carolina Library. I found this report from the State Agricultural Board, and North Carolina was such a racist state then, but this report interviewed thousands of farmers, and it told the truth about how the African Americans were paying 30% to borrow money on rented land. And it was all about the landless farmers and how they were just getting slaughtered. And there were a lot of white landless farmers, too, and they were at least able to borrow money at 6%. And some of them had to borrow at 30%, but it was such a rigged game. And and starting to understand these kinds of things is important. The other thing is I went through all the death certificates down on the coastal plain. And, people, I don't know what your politics is, and I don't want to get into Obamacare, but people don't understand the death in these farming communities. And the death rate for African Americans was more than double that for Caucasian farmers. And when you looked at the women and children and young people dying in these farming communities, as I went through the death records, it just struck me about how much our history needs to be a part of what we live today, because it's important.
And I agree wholeheartly. People want to check you out or check out your book, where can they go?
I'm at Lazenby on Twitter. It's Lazenby, B as in boy, Y. The name of my book is Michael Jordan, The Life. And it's published by Little Brown, which is a big dog publisher. And so the book's everywhere. I will tell you that, and you want a comparative shop, because it's a $30 book, but some places have it for as little as $18. You can find discounts when you get on Google. And so wherever, it's also the libraries. It's being translated into several languages, and it's my hope that that a lot of people read it and begin that conversation.
Oh, one final question. This is a digital show usually. So what type of gadgets or apps do you use?
I'm 62. My wife is a technologist. My youngest kid is a technologist in New York. I barely get my phone dialed. I barely get my books written. I am not a real strong apps guy. I wish I had more of them. And, I taught journalism a fair amount of my life, but I always said I learned more from my students than they learned from me. I had some brilliant students at Virginia Tech. One of them is one of the top dogs at Spotify, and so and other places. And so they would help me get through if I needed an app. My wife helped them.
That's a good way to end the conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. Best to you.
I want to thank Roland Lazenby for being a great guest on The Digital Life. Be sure to check out his book, Michael Jordan, The Life, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores across the country. Before I go, I have a Twitter question for you. Tweet me at Kevin Lockett and tell me who is the greatest basketball player of all time. Use the hashtag MyNBA. That's the hashtag MyNBA. And tell me, who do you think is the greatest basketball player of all time? All right, everybody. It's The Digital Life. I'm Kevin Lockett, and I'm out.
The Digital Life with Kevin Lockett.